You know, there are moments in life, pivotal moments, where you realize the carefully constructed rulebook of civilized society just gets chucked clean out the window. Finding your house, your sanctuary, the place you poured your savings and your heart into, occupied by the one person on the planet whose mere existence feels like a personal affront, while you're thousands of miles away serving your country? Yeah, that's definitively one of those moments. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it still makes my blood boil just thinking about it. How did I, Captain John Brenner, a platoon leader in the United States Army, find myself in the utterly surreal position of planning a tactical reclamation of my own suburban three-bedroom, two-bath from a power-drunk HOA president named, you guessed it, Karen? It's a story so bizarre, so outrageously bonkers, that even I have trouble believing it happened sometimes. And I was there, so buckle up because this is a wild one. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from tonight, because you are not going to believe the lengths some people will go to and the lengths we had to go to stop them. Before the storm, there was the calm, or what passed for calm in a neighborhood governed by the iron fist of Mrs. Karen Weatherby, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. I'd bought my house about 2 years prior, a nice little place with a decent yard for my, then non-existent, dog, close enough to base, but far enough to feel like a civilian on weekends. It was perfect. Or it would have been if not for Karen. My first run-in was classic. My grass was, and I quote from the meticulously typed notice complete with a threatening red border, 3/4 of an inch in excess of the community standard maximum height of 3 inches. I'd just come off a grueling 72-hour field exercise. I was tired, I was dirty, and the last thing on my mind was the aesthetic sensibilities of the HOA. I mowed it the next day, but the tone was set. Karen, a woman who looked like she starched her entire personality along with her expensive, yet somehow always slightly mismatched, designer leisure wear, patrolled Oakwood Estates in her gleaming white Cadillac Escalade like it was her personal fiefdom. Her husband, a perpetually nervous-looking man named Gerald, who always seemed to be trailing 3 steps behind her carrying a clipboard and a tape measure, was her silent, enabling Sancho Panza. She had a way of smiling that didn't reach her eyes, a condescending tilt of the head when she addressed you, as if you were a particularly dim-witted child. She was, in short, a nightmare. But a manageable one, I thought. Annoying, yes. A reason to invoke tactical measures? Not yet. Then came the deployment orders. Afghanistan. A year-long tour. It's part of the job what I signed up for. I put my affairs in order, arranged for a landscaping service recommended by a neighbor, ironically to avoid any further grass-related communiques from Karen, had another neighbor, old Mrs. Henderson, agreed to keep an eye on the place and collect my mail and set up automatic bill payments. I even sent a courtesy email to the HOA board, including Karen, informing them of my deployment and providing contact information for Mrs. Henderson in case of any real emergencies. I thought I'd covered all the bases. I was wrong. So wrong. The first few months overseas were intense. Long days, short nights, the constant hum of being in a combat zone. Home felt a million miles away, a different planet. I'd get occasional updates from Mrs. Henderson. All quiet, dear. Lawn looks lovely. Had a bit of a storm last week, but your house is fine. Standard stuff. Then, about 6 months in, the emails stopped. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. I figured she might be on vacation, or maybe her old phone was acting up. I wasn't overly concerned, not initially. The bombshell dropped during a rare video call with my parents. My mom looked agitated. "John," she said, her voice tight, "we got a call from a Mr. Peterson, a neighbor of yours. He said he thought we should know something strange is going on at your house." Strange? What kind of strange? My mind raced. Burst pipe? Break in? He said, my dad interjected, his face grim, that it looks like someone's living there. He's seen lights on at night, cars in the driveway that aren't yours. Lights on? Cars? I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Whose cars? I asked, trying to keep my voice level, professional, the way it was trained to be even when my insides were churning. Well, my mom said, hesitating, he mentioned a white Escalade. Frequently. A white Escalade. Karen's chariot number. It couldn't be. It was too insane, too brazen. There had to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. And My dad added, his voice laced with disbelief. He said he saw Karen Weatherby, the HOA president you've mentioned, on your front porch, directing movers. Movers? My blood ran cold. The connection was spotty, the audio cutting in and out, but the message was crystal clear. Karen Weatherby, the petty tyrant of lawn heights and trash can placement, had apparently decided to upgrade her living situation into my house while I was deployed. The sheer unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. My initial reaction was a stunned silence, then a wave of white-hot fury that nearly made me drop the satellite phone. This wasn't just an HOA overreach. This was a hostile occupation. I tried to get Mrs. Henderson again, her number still going to voicemail. I called Mr. Peterson, the neighbor who'd contacted my parents. He sounded nervous, apologetic for not reaching out sooner. "We all just assumed you'd rented it out, Captain Brenner," he stammered. Mrs. Weatherby told everyone at an HOA meeting that you'd made arrangements for her to, house sit for the duration of your deployment. To ensure its upkeep to community standards, she said. Sounded fishy to some of us, but she had some sort of letter. A letter? A forged letter, no doubt. My mind was reeling. I thanked him, my voice tight with controlled rage. I had to confirm it. I needed eyes on. I called the one person I knew wouldn't hesitate, my buddy Mike, who lived a couple of towns over. "Mike," I said, "I need a favor, a big one. I need you to drive by my house, now, and tell me exactly what you see." He didn't ask many questions, just heard the urgency in my voice. An hour later he called back. "Bro," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "You're not gonna like this. There's definitely someone living there. Lights on, curtains drawn, and yeah, that white Escalade is parked right in your driveway like it owns the place. Saw a woman who matches your description of Karen fussing with some new potted plants on your porch." The rage solidified into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just an injustice, it was a personal violation of the highest order. I was defending freedom thousands of miles away while this suburban despot was annexing my life. My first calls were to the local police department. I explained the situation, emphasizing I was an active-duty soldier deployed overseas. The desk sergeant was sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. "Well, sir, if she's established residency, even if it's fraudulent, it becomes a civil matter. You'll have to evict her through the courts." "Civil matter?" I was sputtering. "She's a trespasser. She broke into my house." "Do you have proof of that, sir? Or proof she doesn't have a lease, however she obtained it?" I didn't, not yet, not from Afghanistan. The wheels of justice, I was quickly learning, grind very, very slowly, especially when you're on the other side of the world. I tried contacting the other HOA board members. Most of their numbers, conveniently, went straight to voicemail or were no longer in service. The one I did reach, a meek-sounding treasurer named Arthur, stammered something about Karen having handled all the arrangements and that she'd assured the board everything was above board. He sounded terrified of her. It became sickeningly clear. Karen ran the HOA like her personal mafia, and the board were either complicit or cowed into silence. My frustration was building into a dangerous pressure. I was a soldier, trained to deal with hostile actors, trained to secure objectives. My home had been invaded, and the system designed to protect me was failing. I felt helpless, a feeling I absolutely loathed. This HOA president hadn't just crossed a line, she'd obliterated it, dancing on the ashes with her tacky designer sneakers. Little did she know, she wasn't dealing with some pushover civilian. She was dealing with a man who led a platoon of highly skilled, fiercely loyal soldiers, and she was about to find out what that meant. The thought started as a flicker, a crazy, impossible idea. But the more roadblocks I hit, the more that flicker grew into a steady, burning flame. If the system wouldn't help me, I'd have to help myself. The next few weeks were a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, I led my men, focused on the mission, did my duty. By night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a burning sense of injustice, I became an investigator, a strategist, a man obsessed with reclaiming his home. My first priority was gathering intel. Karen Weatherby had made a critical error. She'd underestimated me, and she'd underestimated the bonds of loyalty that extend beyond the battlefield. I started by leveraging my emergency leave request. My CO, A good man who'd seen his share of bizarre situations listened to my story with a mixture of disbelief and sympathy. He couldn't officially sanction any unconventional actions, but he fast-tracked my leave, giving me a precious 2-week window to get back stateside and sort this mess out. While the paperwork was processing, I reached out to my platoon. I didn't order them to do anything, of course. But during a quiet moment in the rec tent, I laid out the situation to my platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Marcus Sarge Jackson, and a couple of my trusted squad leaders, Staff Sergeant Diaz and Sergeant Miller. These weren't just soldiers under my command, they were my brothers in arms, men I'd trusted with my life, and who trusted me with theirs. Their reaction was instantaneous and visceral. Sarge, a man who normally had the emotional range of a granite statue, actually slammed his fist on the table. That witch, he growled, a sentiment echoed, albeit more colorfully, by Diaz and Miller. Sir, Diaz said, his eyes glinting, you just tell us what you need. We've got your six. Miller, a quiet specialist who was a wizard with anything electronic, chimed in, I can probably dig up some public records. See if this Karen has a history of this kind of crazy. And dig he did. Miller, using skills that were probably best not inquired about too closely, started pulling up digital breadcrumbs. It turned out Karen Weatherby had a string of lawsuits against her from previous neighborhoods, mostly petty HOA disputes, but one or two that hinted at boundary encroachments and aggressive tactics. Nothing quite on this scale, but a pattern of entitled, bullying behavior. She and her husband, Gerald, also had some financial question marks, a couple of failed businesses, some outstanding liens. Suddenly, occupying a paid-off house owned by a deployed soldier might have looked like a very attractive, albeit highly illegal, solution to their problems. Meanwhile, stateside, my friend Mike became my invaluable eyes and ears. He started doing discreet drive-bys at different times of day, noting Karen's routines. She seemed to leave most mornings around 9, usually in the Escalade, often with Gerald, and returned in the late afternoon. She was having mail delivered, packages arriving. She'd even, according to Mike, put up new, frillier curtains in my living room window. The indignity! He also managed to speak to a few more neighbors. Mrs. Henderson, it turned out, had been bullied into silence. Karen had apparently confronted her, waving a vaguely official-looking document, which Mrs. Henderson, in her 80s and easily flustered, hadn't questioned, claiming I'd appointed Karen as my official caretaker. Karen had then advised Mrs. Henderson that her services were no longer needed and that any interference would be met with legal repercussions from the HOA. The poor woman was terrified. But another neighbor, a younger guy named Ben who lived across the street, was furious. He'd suspected something was off from the start. He'd seen the movers, seen Karen directing them. He started taking photos, short video clips on his phone, Karen bossing around a bewildered-looking lawn crew in my yard, Gerald struggling to carry oversized shopping bags from high-end stores into my house. She's acting like she owns the place, man. Ben told me over a crackly international call. Throws these little garden parties, brags about her newly acquired property. It's disgusting. This was gold. Photographic evidence, eyewitness accounts. Ben even managed to get a shot of the letter Karen had apparently shown people. He'd seen her flash it at another curious neighbor. He couldn't get close enough to read it clearly, but it was on what looked like cheap letterhead with a clearly forged signature that looked nothing like mine. The legal front was still frustratingly slow. I'd managed to retain a lawyer remotely, a sharp woman named Miss Davies, recommended by a JAG officer. She was appalled by the situation but confirmed what the police had said. Eviction was a process, and Karen, by virtue of having moved in and established some form of fraudulent residency, would fight it. Davies explained. It could take months, even with your deployment status. Judges are wary of summary evictions if there's any ambiguity, however manufactured. Months. I didn't have months. I had a 2-week leave window and a burning desire to see Karen Weatherby's tacky throw pillows on my front lawn. Miss Davies did have one piece of useful advice, however. Captain Brenner, she said, while a formal eviction is slow, asserting your rights as the homeowner is critical. If you can regain peaceful possession, given she is in fact a trespasser who gained entry through fraudulent means, her legal standing to get back in becomes significantly weaker. The burden of proof would shift heavily onto her. regain peaceful possession. That phrase echoed in my mind. The definition of peaceful was, perhaps, open to interpretation. My platoon, bless their loyal hearts, had already started referring to the upcoming mission as Operation Reclaim Homestead. Sarge, Diaz, and Miller, along with a few other trusted guys from my platoon who were also due for leave around the same time, had already volunteered to assist with the move-out. Their idea of assistance likely involved more direct methods than Miss Davies envisioned, but the core idea was sound. I was the legal owner. Karen was a squatter, a thief. She had taken my home through deceit and intimidation. The more I learned, the more brazen her actions appeared. She'd changed the locks, of course. Mike confirmed that when he tried my spare key at my request, no dice. She'd submitted a change of address form for my mail, a federal offense. Miller, with his digital sleuthing, found out she'd even tried to get the utilities switched into her name, though, thankfully, my deployed status and existing payment arrangements had thrown a wrench in those particular gears for some of them. She was systematically trying to erase me from my own life. The escalation was clear. This wasn't just about a house, it was about principle. It was about standing up to a bully who preyed on those she perceived as vulnerable, and she had picked the wrong soldier to mess with. The plan began to form, not in a lawyer's office, but in the way soldiers plan: objective, resources, course of action, contingencies. My objective was simple: Karen out, me in. The peaceful possession part was key. I didn't want a brawl, I didn't want arrests. Well, not my arrest, anyway. I wanted to walk into my house with overwhelming, undeniable authority and inform Miss Karen Weatherby that her extended, unsolicited vacation was over. The flight back stateside was the longest 14 hours of my life. Every minute felt like an eternity, my mind cycling through the plan, through Karen's smug face, through the image of her Escalade in my driveway. My CO had managed to get me, Sarge, Diaz, and Miller on the same transport for the first leg of the journey, a fortunate coincidence that allowed for some final, quiet strategy sessions. We weren't planning anything illegal, I kept telling myself and them. We were planning an assertion of property rights. A very firm, very unambiguous assertion. The force in the by-force that kept echoing in my head was the force of presence, the force of right. The force of a dozen highly capable individuals who were very good at looking intimidating when they needed to. Miss Davies had armed me with a binder thick with documents: my deed, mortgage statements, utility bills in my name, my deployment orders, copies of the photos Ben had taken, a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Henderson. Once she knew I was coming back and that Karen's reign of terror was potentially ending, she'd found her courage, and a strongly worded letter from Miss Precisé and Patience Ration Steven, our terror was potentially ending. Davies herself, outlining Karen's illegal occupation and demanding immediate vacation of the premises. This binder was my shield and my sword. The platoon members who'd volunteered, there were 8 of them in total who managed to coordinate their leave, were my cavalry. They weren't in uniform, of course. Just 8 fit, determined-looking guys in civilian clothes. But there's a certain bearing, a certain quiet intensity that soldiers carry, even off-duty, that tends to discourage arguments. We landed, cleared customs, and I made a beeline for a rental car agency, getting a large van, plenty of room for personnel, and, hopefully, Karen's hastily packed belongings. My first stop was a locksmith. I explained the situation, locked out of my own house by a squatter while deployed. I showed him my ID, my deed. He was a burly ex-Marine, and his eyes narrowed with understanding and a certain grim satisfaction. "Captain," he said, "you call me when you're there. I'll be on standby. We'll get you in your house, one way or another. No charge for a fellow serviceman getting shafted like this." His support was a small but significant morale boost. Next, a quick rendezvous with Ben, the neighbor. He gave me the latest intel. Karen was home, Escalade in the driveway. He'd also, bless his proactive heart, called a couple of other friendly neighbors, explaining I was back and was going to confront Karen. They were ready to witness, to provide backup if needed, and, I suspected, to enjoy the show. One of them was an off-duty sheriff's deputy, which could prove very useful. The plan was straightforward, almost military in its simplicity. Phase 1, approach and secure. We'd arrive, I'd attempt to use my key, knowing it wouldn't work. Then, the locksmith would do his thing. The moment that door was open, I would step inside. My house, my possession. Phase 2. Confront and evict. I would present Karen with the legal documents and the undeniable fact of my presence. My guys would be with me, silent, observant, a clear message that this was not a negotiation. Phase 3. Removal. Karen would be instructed to gather her personal belongings and vacate immediately. Any resistance would be met with a call to the police, whom the off-duty deputy neighbor had already agreed to liaise with if necessary, explaining the situation from a position of legal clarity. Homeowner reclaims property from trespasser. We assembled a block away from my house. My heart was pounding, a mixture of adrenaline, anger, and a fierce protective instinct. This was it. I looked at Sarge, Diaz, Miller, and the other 5 soldiers, good men loyal to the core. They weren't there for violence. They were there because they believed in justice, and they believed in me. "All right," I said, my voice low and steady. "Let's be clear. I do the talking. You guys are just my very persuasive moving company. We stay calm, we stay professional. She's the one in the wrong here. Let her be the one to lose her cool. We document everything." Diaz had his phone ready to record. Miller had a small high-def camera. We drove the final block, pulling up directly behind Karen's gleaming white Escalade, effectively boxing it in. The sight of that ostentatious vehicle in my driveway, a symbol of her arrogance and entitlement, sent a fresh jolt of anger through me. Showtime. I walked up my own front path, the path I'd poured the concrete for myself one scorching summer weekend. The frilly new curtains in the window were like a personal insult. My guys fanned out slightly behind me, a formidable presence. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell I had installed. The wait was agonizingly short. The door opened and there she was. Karen Weatherby, in the flesh, in my foyer. She was wearing a silk kimono-style robe that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, a smug, self-satisfied expression on her face that faltered slightly when she saw me. Then her eyes flicked past me to the group of rather large, unimpressed-looking men standing on my lawn. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. "Well, well," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, though a tremor of uncertainty had crept in. "What is this? Some sort of intimidation tactic?" Before she could launch into a typical Karen tirade, I cut her off, my voice calm but cold as ice. "Karen," I said, holding up my military ID and the thick binder of documents, "this is Captain John Brenner. This is my house. You are trespassing. Your extended, uninvited stay is over. You need to leave now." Karen Weatherby's face went through a fascinating series of transformations in the span of about 10 seconds. First, confusion, as if she couldn't quite process my actual physical presence. Then a flicker of what might have been fear as her gaze swept over Sarge and the others, who were standing silently, arms casually crossed, looking utterly unmovable. This quickly morphed into theatrical outrage. "How dare you!" she shrieked, her voice ratcheting up several decibels. "I have an agreement, a lease. You can't just barge in here." She gestured vaguely behind her, as if a magical lease document would materialize. "Really, Karen?" I said, my voice still level, though the effort was immense. I took a step forward into the threshold of my home. She instinctively tried to block me, planting her hands on the doorframe. "You are not coming in here." "Actually," I said, "I am." This was the moment. I glanced back at Sarge, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. That was all the signal I needed. I wasn't going to physically assault her, but I also wasn't going to be denied entry to my own property. "Karen," I stated, "you have 2 options. You can step aside and allow me, the legal owner of this property, to enter, or I can have the locksmith who is waiting down the street open my door. Either way, I am coming in. And trust me, the second option will be far more embarrassing for you when the neighbors see it." Her eyes darted to the street, then back to me, then to the impassive faces of my men. The confidence was visibly draining from her, replaced by a shrewish fury. "I'm calling the police," she screeched, fumbling for a phone that was presumably tucked into a pocket of her expensive robe. "Please do," I said, almost smiling. "In fact, my neighbor, Deputy Miller from the Sheriff's Department, is already aware of the situation and is on his way over to ensure a peaceful transition." He has copies of my ownership documents as well. That seemed to stop her cold. The mention of an actual law enforcement officer, one who wasn't going to be swayed by her usual bluster, clearly rattled her. Her hand froze. Just then, as if on cue, the locksmith's van pulled up quietly behind our rental. He hopped out, tool bag in hand, and gave me a thumbs up. Simultaneously, Ben and a couple of other neighbors appeared on their lawns, watching with undisguised interest. The off-duty deputy, a calm, authoritative man in civilian clothes, walked over and stood near us, observing. The pressure on Karen was mounting from all sides. She looked trapped, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Her husband, Gerald, suddenly appeared behind her, looking pale and terrified. He'd clearly been listening. She turned back to me, her face contorted. "You can't do this. I have rights." "You have the right to gather your personal belongings and vacate my property immediately," I corrected her. "Every minute you remain, you are deepening your legal troubles. Trespassing, fraudulent representation. It's quite a list, Karen. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, whose letter I believe you received but chose to ignore, is very keen to discuss it with you in court." I held up the binder again. "This contains my deed, my mortgage, my military orders, affidavits from your coerced neighbors, photographs of your illegal occupation, and evidence of your forged documents. Would you like to review it?" She stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. The fight was visibly ebbing out of her, her shoulders slumped. The silk robe suddenly looked less like a power statement and more like a pathetic costume. Gerald was tugging at her arm, whispering frantically. Finally, with a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a snarl, she spat. "Fine, but you'll hear from my lawyer." "I sincerely hope I do," I replied, stepping fully into my foyer. Sergeant Diaz moved smoothly to flank the doorway, not menacingly, but with a clear message. There would be no re-entry once she was out. "You have 1 hour to remove your personal effects," I informed her. "My men will assist you in expediting that process by bringing your items to the curb. Anything left after 1 hour will be considered abandoned property." Her jaw dropped. 1 hour? That's impossible. I have furniture, clothes, my collection of artisanal scented spires. I kid you not, that's what she called her ridiculous, oversized candles. 1 hour, Karen. I repeated firmly. Tick-tock. And so began the most satisfying eviction I could have ever imagined. Karen, alternating between shrieking orders at Gerald and muttering threats under her breath, started frantically trying to pack. My guys, with surprising efficiency and a distinct lack of gentleness, began moving items. Boxes of what looked like new clothes, still with tags on, kitchen gadgets I'd never seen before, hideous decorative pillows that offended my military sensibilities. It all started piling up on my front lawn. Each item removed felt like a small victory, a piece of my life being reclaimed. Karen tried to argue about a hideous faux marble coffee table. "That's a designer piece," she wailed. Sarge, without a word, picked it up with one hand and carried it out. The look on her face was priceless. The neighbors were watching, some openly, some peeking through curtains. There was a palpable sense of communal satisfaction. The reign of Queen Karen was well and truly over. The police did eventually arrive, summoned by a frantic Karen. The deputy neighbor had a quiet word with them, showed them my paperwork. They listened patiently to Karen's hysterical, rambling account, then calmly informed her that this was indeed a civil matter that she would have to pursue through the courts. But as she was not the homeowner and had no legitimate lease, she needed to vacate the premises as requested by me, the actual owner. They stayed to keep the peace, which mostly involved watching Karen have a full-blown meltdown as the last of her belongings, including a truly horrifying collection of porcelain cat figurines, were deposited unceremoniously on the curb. The white Escalade, once a symbol of her dominion, was now her escape vehicle, rapidly being filled with a jumble of possessions under Gerald's panicked direction. The hour was up. Karen, disheveled and defeated, her silk robe smudged, her face streaked with angry tears, glared at me one last time. "You haven't heard the last of this, Captain Brenner," she seethed. "Oh, I rather think I have, Karen," I replied, allowing myself a small, tight smile. And then she was gone. The Escalade peeling away from the curb, leaving behind a small mountain of her discarded life on my lawn. I stood in my doorway, flanked by my men, and took a deep, cleansing breath of air that, for the first time in months, actually felt like it belonged to me. My house was mine again. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of activity. First, the locksmith, who had been patiently waiting, got to work changing every single lock on the property. "Can't be too careful with that type," he grunted, expertly dismantling the old hardware Karen had presumably installed. As he worked, my guys did a quick sweep of the house. It was an experience. Karen hadn't just lived in my house, she'd tried to Karenify it. The frilly curtains were even worse up close. Hideous floral bedspreads adorned my beds. My minimalist living room had been cluttered with knickknacks and scented candles that smelled like a potpourri factory explosion. There were small scuffs on the walls where she'd clearly tried to hang her own art. It was an aesthetic assault. We spent the next few hours bagging up the remaining detritus Karen had left behind, mostly trash, unwanted magazines, and a surprising number of empty wine bottles. The pile on the curb grew even larger, a monument to her audacity. Ben and the other neighbors came over, offering help, offering congratulations. There was a celebratory air, like a tiny liberation day for Oakwood Estates. Mrs. Henderson even baked a pie, her relief palpable. "Oh, John, I'm so glad you're back," she said, her eyes shining. That woman was a terror. The off-duty deputy clapped me on the shoulder. "Well handled, Captain. Sometimes you gotta meet force with rightful force." The fallout for Karen was swift and, from my perspective, deeply satisfying. The story of her hostile takeover and subsequent forced eviction spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The HOA board, finally free of her tyrannical shadow and likely terrified of being implicated in her fraudulent activities, called an emergency meeting. Arthur, the formerly meek treasurer, apparently found his spine. He, along with other board members who had been railroaded or intimidated by Karen, presented a litany of her abuses of power, culminating in the illegal occupation of my home. The letter she had brandished, claiming my authorization, was easily proven to be a crude forgery once I provided the board with actual samples of my signature and official correspondence. Within a week, Karen Weatherby was not only impeached as HOA president, but also unceremoniously voted off the board entirely. Her reign was over. Gerald, her enabling husband, apparently filed for divorce shortly thereafter, citing irreconcilable differences and, according to neighborhood gossip, a deep desire to never see another artisanal scented candle as long as he lived. Legally, Miss Davies was having a field day. We pursued civil charges against Karen for trespassing, damages to my property, the cost of new locks, repairing scuffs, and a deep cleaning to exorcise the lingering scent of ocean breeze, potpourri, and emotional distress. The evidence was overwhelming. The photos Ben took, Mrs. Henderson's affidavit, the testimony of the locksmith and the deputy, my own meticulously documented timeline. Karen didn't stand a chance. Faced with the prospect of a very public and very embarrassing court battle, she opted to settle. The amount wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to cover all my expenses, compensate me for the violation, and most importantly, serve as a painful financial consequence for her actions. But the real smoking gun, the thing that truly sealed Karen's fate, beyond just losing my house and her HOA throne, came from an unexpected quarter. During the board's frantic efforts to untangle the mess Karen had left behind, Arthur, the treasurer, stumbled upon some serious financial irregularities. It turned out Karen hadn't just been power-hungry, she'd been sticky-fingered. She'd been systematically embezzling HOA funds for years, small amounts here and there, disguised as administrative expenses or community improvement projects that never quite materialized. The occupation of my house, it seemed, might have been partly driven by a desperate attempt to maintain a lifestyle her actual finances couldn't support, or perhaps she saw it as another asset to leverage. The board, now under new, more responsible leadership, turned their findings over to the district attorney. Criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud followed. Last I heard, Karen Weatherby was facing significant jail time, her designer tracksuits likely to be swapped for something far less glamorous. The Oakwood Estates HOA underwent a complete overhaul. New bylaws were drafted, emphasizing transparency and accountability. The community, shaken by Karen's brazenness, became more engaged, more vigilant. They even, much to my initial reluctance, nominated me for the new HOA board. I initially refused. I'd had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime, but Sarge, with his typical blunt wisdom, said, "Sir, if good people don't step up, the Karens of the world will always find a way back in." He had a point. So, I served a term, helped put sensible rules in place, and ensured that power was distributed, not concentrated. Looking back, the whole thing still feels surreal. It was a perfect storm of entitlement, audacity, and a complete underestimation of who she was dealing with. Karen thought she was targeting an absent soldier, an easy mark. She didn't count on his training, his resolve, or the unwavering loyalty of his platoon. She didn't count on good neighbors finally finding their voices. The experience taught me a lot about the importance of vigilance, even in sleepy suburbia, about the strength of community when good people stand together, and about the profound satisfaction of reclaiming what's yours from someone who so arrogantly tried to take it. My house feels like home again, scrubbed clean of Karen's influence, filled instead with the camaraderie of friends and the quiet satisfaction of justice served. The frilly curtains are long gone, replaced by sensible blinds. The only scent is usually coffee, or maybe gun oil after a cleaning session. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch, I see a new white Escalade drive by, different model, different driver, and I can't help but chuckle. So, that's how my platoon helped me evict a rogue HOA president from my own home. Craziest housewarming party ever, right? Let me know what you think in the comments, and what you would have done in my situation. And if you see Karen Weatherby trying to sell you artisanal candles, maybe just walk the other way.